This episode is sponsored by Monkey Stuff. Monkey Stuff makes things for makers. We're inspired every day by the craft and creativity of makers and design and manufacture tools and accessories to try to make your making life a bit more delightful. Our products are designed in California, by makers and for makers, and manufactured in the USA. Check out our line of pottery accessories and tools at monkeystuff.com. Follow us on Instagram to see what we're up to in our studios, and keep on making great things.
Hey, this is Erin with Cornell Studio Supply, located in the gem city of Dayton, Ohio. As a proud sponsor of this episode, we are happy to help you with all your pottery and ceramic sculpture needs by providing the best customer service and world-class workshops. Join us this summer for a glaze mixing workshop with our very own low-fire expert, Ben Carter, July 24th through the 26th. Visit cornellstudiosupply.com to sign up. At Cornell Studio Supply, we are owned and operated for potters, by potters.
Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 570 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. This week we have a live show that was taped at the Workhouse Arts Center with Sarah Berry, Lilianne Milgrom, Kessler Ulberg, and Jason Alexander. In our interview, we discussed their work in the 16th Annual Workhouse Clay International, the art scene in Northern Virginia, and the history of the arts at the center, which was a prison for over 90 years. If you'd like to see the work that they had in the show, you can click on the link in the show notes. On the topic of live shows, I wanted to mention that I'll be up in Boston with the For Flux's Sake crew doing a set of live shows June the 5th and 6th. If you're a fan of the podcast, this was a great opportunity to ask Matt, Rose, and Kathy your questions in person. That June the 5th event is free. It's from 5 to 6 p.m. at the Harvard Ed portal. Then the next day, we're going to have a paid event that is a Flux U recording. That's going to be in the morning from 10 to 1. If you'd like to find out more information, you can do that at ceramicmaterialsworkshop.com/upcoming events. Also wanted to take a minute and plug the Tales from the Vault podcast feed. This is an exclusive perk of Patreon supporters for this show. If you make a donation, you will gain access to dozens of episodes that are no longer available on major podcast apps. I just recently remastered a couple episodes that are up on the Tales from the Vault feed, including a live show we did back at the Belger Arts Center back in 2013, as well as an interview with James Beard Award-winning chef Paul Berglund. If you'd like to check those out, you can make a donation and get access to that today at patreon.com/redclayrambler. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. To start, I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of the Workhouse Arts Center and also about ceramics at the Workhouse Arts Center. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah. And I'm actually, before we even do this, I want you to just go down the line. And if you could each say your name and then what your profession is or what your part of this exhibition is. So we'll start with you.
My name is Sarah Berry, and I'm an independent curator and multidisciplinary artist, and I have been curating here at the Workhouse Arts Center for 2 years.
My name is Lilianne Milgrom. I wear many hats. Tonight I'm wearing my ceramic artist hat, but I also write and I also paint. Welcome.
My name is Kessler Ulberg, and I actually work as a full-time ceramic studio manager here at the Workhouse Ceramics, and an artist.
I'm Jason Alexander. I teach pottery classes here at the Workhouse and out of my private studio in Manassas, and I've been doing this for about 30 years.
So Sarah, if you could just start us off with talking about the center and also about clay at the center.
There is a really interesting history here, as many people already know. The Workhouse Arts Center has been functioning as an art center for 17 years. It was also a prison before that for 91 years. And this is the 25th anniversary of the closure of that prison. It was a DC correctional institution, and it was humongous. When you walk around this campus, you see a huge green quad in the middle, surrounded by many buildings with great archways, all built in brick. And it is, many people comment on the beauty of the campus. The darker side of that is that the people who were incarcerated here created each brick and built the entire facility themselves. This land was selected originally because it is rich in clay and because DC wanted to use this space as a brick labor camp, basically. And when it first opened in 1910, there was already a beehive kiln operating, and their goal was to add a dozen more and up the brick production to 40,000 bricks per day. A great number of buildings in Washington, D.C. were created with Lorton brick. So clay and this site have basically always been one and the same. This is the 16th Annual Clay International exhibition, so there are a lot of people who worked on this before me, and those are the giants whose shoulders I stand on, but it's grown a lot over the years, and we're really seeing a greater amount of interest from out of the DMV region, and brave and very talented souls who ship their precious, fragile ceramic art from afar to be included. This year we had over 200 entries that you had to jury to narrow down, to the 50 pieces that you selected. And it was fascinating to see, just a testament to the growth of this exhibition, that over half of the entries that you selected are first-time exhibitors in this show. So that's wonderful. It was about half, but it's nice that we have veteran artists who have been in the show before. I think everybody on this panel has been in this show in previous years. Jason, it's your first year? Yep. Awesome. And but I know Lilianne and Kessler have shown in this before, but because we invite a different juror every year, the priorities, tastes, aesthetic preferences of each juror does vary greatly. And even as a curator, sometimes I walk through and I look at the stuff and I'm like, okay. Because I look at all the entries and sometimes things that blow my mind don't make it into the show. So it's not necessarily an indication of quality so much as we're having a conversation now between artists throughout the United States, around the world, and the juror that we select. So that's, the gist of it. It's really an anticipated show, and it's something that, as you noted in your juror statement, that showing the breadth of what you can do with clay is really, this is sort of a one-stop shop for being able to experience that. We have pieces that look like they could have been made long ago, and there are pieces that are so contemporary they could really only be speaking to the moment. And I love that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I had a question before we talk to the panelists, a little bit about your job as the curator. I got to select as the juror the pieces that would be in the show, but you were selecting placement. You were creating visual conversations between pieces. And I'm specifically thinking about Guillermo Guardia's piece, Immigrant Punk, which is a Huaco vessel from Peru that is highly decorated in a black and white, very visual graphic style. So in some ways, it's a very easy piece to show because it's so visually stunning. From across the room, you can see what it is. But it's also hard because you have to draw anything around it into its conversation. So can you talk a little bit about how you chose to show just in that corner of the gallery what was happening?
It's interesting, and I'm going to take a bit of a digression too, but this year we got a lot of political commentary in clay. And I had to make the decision as to whether or not those works would live together or in different parts of the gallery, which is the same for any show. We're sitting right now in the McGuire Woods Gallery surrounded by our Flourish exhibition, which is art made here on campus. We have nearly 80 artists working in studios across campus, and no two are similar. So when you're setting up a big group show, you have to look at color, form, dimensions of the work, and messaging. Maybe now more than ever, but certainly in this Clay International, the immigrant punk piece, which it's interesting too with what was going on in the news when you made your selection that this artist is from Minneapolis, which maybe you knew and maybe you didn't, but it's fascinating that this is all kind of happening at the same time. There's a piece that harkens back to the Holocaust and specifically incriminating queerness. And there's a piece where there's a rodent. I don't want to I don't know if it's a rat or a mouse. Sorry, rodent. With looking regal with its minions at its feet, and a mother nurturing a child surrounded by food and by weapons, ammunition, and so on. So I'm looking at all of this visual dialogue that echoes, the news that I wish I could ignore and tune out, and deciding, do they live together? Do they get scattered throughout the gallery? What kind of stories can they tell as a unit? So what I ended up doing is I have this rodent king, and I'm so sorry, I wish I could do the artist justice. Artist, if you're listening, I am not great with names, but I see the art so clearly in my mind's eye, looking back at both immigrant punk and then this beautiful piece that has protesters on it. And so it's this sort of what we're looking at in the world now, where it's like the people who have the power kind of being faced, and vice versa, with the people who are experiencing quite a large sense of powerlessness. And then hovering above this king is the mother and the child, sort of as a grounding of like this, the future and all this chaos are existing simultaneously. So that's the conversation that I was going for in that section of the gallery.
Yeah, and when y'all leave the gallery today, if you could go down and think about the show as one large conversation, one large dinner party with a lot of little conversations going on. That's kind of the joy of curating, is that you get to set who's at the dinner party and shape those conversations a little bit. So, Lilianne, I wanted to bring you into the conversation to talk about your piece. The piece is titled Jasmine. It's from a series called Disneyland Revisited. Can you just visually talk a little bit about the piece and the bigger body of work?
Yeah, I'll start off with trying to describe what it looks like. It's a rather small, I'd say medium-sized, semicircular, three-dimensional form, I would say, that I used as a canvas because I'm also a painter and I love to use clay to inscribe my ideas, my designs on it. And if you can imagine this semicircular form, three-dimensional, it's topped by a vintage carafe, I don't know what you would call it, carafe stopper out of crystal. On either side of this semicircle, you see a Disneyland-esque type of illustration, and on the other side, a more human version. So that's the description of the piece.
This whole series looks at Disney as a cultural force. I've read the writing about this body of work that you're interested in this idea of the Disneyfication of American society, and I think it's even a larger question of just the influence of corporate imagery on the greater country. Can you talk about this idea of like the Disneyfication of the U.S.?
When I did this series, I thought about the Disneyfication of American society more in terms of like this idealized, almost cloyingly innocent mentality that struck me because I only started living in the States in my late 20s. And so that was my first impression. I didn't grow up here, but that's what I saw. And it was very seductive and very comfortable to be in that, but also very divorced from reality. That's how I saw it. So there's this disconnect between the fantasy and the reality. And I think that the mass-produced, like you say, corporate output is very much feeding into that. So in my version, I was playing with the idea. At first I thought it because, let me go back, Disney actually had an enormous influence on American society. Like they've done tons of research. And especially the heroines, the Disney heroines, how did that impact the female identity and what we're still seeing today? So I was thinking about that and how I would envision my version, the real Jasmine. I'm using the Jasmine Disney princess. And so what you see in the real version is the actual doppelganger counterpart to the very innocent, perfect, sweet princess. And mine has obviously sexual desire, complexity, and just goes beyond. It has an edge. So it's a very different type of Jasmine that I show on the opposite side of this piece.
Yeah, and I think about the cultural production of the United States and the influence that the U.S. media has had all across the world. And I actually was thinking about Australia, where you grew up. I was working in a very remote Indigenous community in Australia around the time that the movie Frozen, do you guys remember Frozen? When that movie came out, it was a worldwide smash. And I would be literally walking out into the bush, and there would be little kids that don't speak English. They only speak Pitjantjara, the Indigenous language there, singing Frozen, the main song from Frozen, in flawless English from the top of the rocks, as if they're proclaiming it out into the bush. And I realized at that point that really what we export as Americans is cultural movies, music, novels. Like that's the thing that goes farther than anything else. So one of the things that I like about this piece is that it takes something that we maybe take for granted. Like I've seen those movies so many. I have a 4-year-old at home, a 4-year-old little girl. So I have seen Jasmine portrayed in the live action version, in the cartoon version, I have books that have that in there. So I think part of Disney's power is that it's become so normalized that we don't think about it anymore. And I think that's the power of the work, is to be able to show that these things do have an impact on young women and girls and people in general.
Well, I also wonder, like, the influence of these animated characters on body image, our ideals of beauty, gender roles, things like that. And so the disparity between what I've shown is the real Jasmine and the heroine of the Disney movies, I think that's what I really wanted to portray, that these aren't real, but we carry them through, and we always try to. What I noticed about when I first came to America is how there's this pursuit of perfection, this pursuit of following your dreams and all this sort of thing, and it's really a fantasy, if you ask me.
Kessler, I wanted to talk about your piece. It's titled Faith Unwired, and it depicts kind of an electrical cord that's wound around itself, that's been severed from the actual source of power, the place where it's plugged in. So can you talk about this visual metaphor and what the disconnection is you're talking about?
Yeah, totally. So, you know what's funny, Ben? I just actually noticed that my extension cord has 2 plugs, so it doesn't have the male and female. They're like both the male parts. So you'll never find an extension cord like that. But yeah, so the piece Faith Unwired is actually influenced by my faith, and that's what a lot of my work is about. I grew up in a Christian household, I grew up in church, that kind of life, and I wasn't really a Christian until like 17, 18, and so I decided to take this personal journey of faith, and it was, for me, as someone growing up in the church and seeing a lot of sacred versus secularity, and then that disconnect in there. And then I was never able to relate to what I was growing up around. And then until there was a pastor who was like preaching some sermon on YouTube. I was making coffee in the kitchen. It was on the TV. I don't know who put it on there. And he was preaching about porn, about pornography. And to me, as somebody who grew up in the house, I grew up in a very religious and kind of legalistic kind of church. So everything was like, you can't go to the movies. I was 18 years old in college and thought sex was evil, but sex was a beautiful thing that God made. So when I was around that age, when I heard that, it kind of like ignited something in me to actually go deeper in this journey of faith. And I actually found out later that it was more about relationship than religion. So pursuing that, ever since then, I've found out, oh wow, people are people, God is God. And then, from there, it kind of I've been shooting for the stars. And so there's that piece, the pieces that I have, I guess to describe it, just picture an extension cord in your garage, but ceramic, that's my piece. And then the other piece that goes along with it is an outlet. So picture an outlet, but ceramic. And the outlet is white. So as we all know, the color of purity. So that was like kind of a representation of God himself being pure and the source of power, in the Christian faith. And then as the coil, it was black because it was like this darkness of sin and all that we, hear about. But also at the same time, there's a message of hope. So the frayed wires in there, I'm actually learning a lot about kilns now. So there's a lot of, the wires, the hot and the neutral on the ground. And to me, it was like a symbol of the Holy Trinity, the ground, they each serving like God, coming through the power, and then the neutral wire connecting back to God through the work that, the story of the cross. And that was that. And then it was a picture of like hope, even though it's separated, it's disconnected. The three frayed wires that are still present, which is kind of the gospel of Jesus. It's like, it's still there. It's like, it's an invitation still. It's still open. So for people to come back, because there's, plenty of like church hurt and stuff like that. I've seen that all my life growing up. And so, that's kind of the gist of the piece. So.
When I was during the exhibition, I at first did not realize that the piece was about faith. And after seeing it and talking to you about it, I think it is the most non-religious looking religious object I've ever seen. And I think I like that. It is not a Byzantine icon. It is not a cross. It is not a symbol that would be ubiquitous, but it's a symbol that's very personal to you. And so I also wondered if there are other sort of times in your life where you felt disconnection. And I'm thinking specifically about immigration, like your story of immigration from moving from Samoa, where you grew up, to the United States. So can you talk about disconnection and reconnection in your own life?
Yeah, totally. When I moved to Illinois in 2019 to study art. I've always been passionate about art and design, and I studied that, and I realized, English being my second language, and I was far from my native tongue. I wasn't speaking it anymore. In fact, I think about 2 years later, I went back for a family reunion, and I couldn't, there were some words I had forgotten. And it's kind of sad, but it's like I need to keep in touch with. It's so hard not being able to find someone else from the same place. It was very hard to make friends and connect with people. Culture barrier, language barrier. Going through all that. And then reconnecting was part for me was just learning. You just have to learn it. Just live and learn, and you just grow through it. And so. Yeah.
Do you think being an artist has allowed you Let me think of the best way to ask the question. Do you think learning to communicate through the visual language of arts has helped you to connect to people through spoken language?
That's a very good question. Yes, I would say 100% yes. And, that's the beauty of art. Part of the reason why I love making art is that I can make a sculpture a figurehead and everybody will know it's a figurehead. There's no need to explain what it is. And that's, I think that's why art is a powerful tool.
Jason, I wanted to bring you into this conversation. We were laughing before, or I was laughing before the recording about everyone has somewhat elaborate titles for their work, but Jason is a potter, and so he called his jar. And that is such a potter way to deal with naming, and I do the same thing, so I was laughing with you about that. But can you describe the jar and talk a little bit about the body of work that's a part of?
Thanks for having me on the show and for joining my work into the show downstairs. We were talking earlier how we were connected when we first met. The book that you wrote is some sort of connected to how we, I think, got connected. So I kind of back up and tell that little brief story, I hope. I guess somehow I got connected with your publisher who was looking to do promotion on and I don't know if it was something you put out. So on my social media was doing well at the time. So it's like, this would be, I guess this is a good thing. I'll put it out on my Instagram and Facebook stuff. So they sent me a copy of your book, and I think maybe a T-shirt, because I looked back and I saw that I was wearing one of your T-shirts and the book, and in this little thing. So a few days later, we had a fire, and we lost all our stuff, including the book. And it was an apartment we were living in at the time. Fortunately, I had just delivered a project I had been working on for a couple of months that had the day before been in the in our dining room there. So anyway, about a week later, your publisher calls and said, "Hey, what did you think of the book?" And I said, "Well, I paged through it, but we lost it in the fire." She said, let me send you another copy of the book. So anyway, that's, I think, how we got connected. And the fire, all that stuff kind of led to where, eventually I'm in the studio I'm in now, eventually kind of leads to here, ultimately. But, and where my work is now, too. You asked about that jar. It's it's about an 8 or 9 inch jar that's multicolored. As far as influence, I think back, I've been doing this about 30 years. And my early instructors, big influence on how I sort of see, where my work should go. And Margaret Boozer, I don't know if you know, so she was a big influence on how I think of pottery. And she said things, like, I remember asking her, did you see this latest thing in some magazine? She's, no, I don't look at that. I try not to let that get into the way. And I think that's where I feel like more of that now. But back then I was really trying to absorb as much as I could from every influence. So this jar in particular, I think, is probably like early American style in its architecture, and then the differences in the color, rather than being salt glazed or simple brown pot, it's kind of got like a wash of color, 3 colors, I think, in this one. The earliest ones I think I did were too many colors, so kind of toning it down a little bit, getting a little more muted, and that's what this one is.
Well, I think about the tension between how the pot is very structured. So it's altered in a way that mathematically, I think it's like altered into 6 sections maybe.
Probably.
Yeah. And it's somewhat of a tight pot, but it is an architecture that you can recognize as being historical. Like it feels like an early American pot. But it also feels like a nod to Chinese 3-color ware.
Sure. Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about, as a potter, delving into histories of other cultures and deciding how you're going to digest them.
Yeah, I think in the case of the color, sure, I think it might look like one thing. It's not necessarily the influence. I think of the way that leaves fade into multicolors, so that's an influence. How do I get that effect? Think of hand-dyed fabric. That's just as much an influence as probably the Chinese porcelain or Chinese pottery that you're talking about.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online resource for research and inspiration, featuring photos of over 4,000 objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great resource for students and teachers. To find out more, visit rosenfieldcollection.com. Well, that's good to hear, because I think we're often, as young potters, as you mentioned, influenced by Ceramics Monthly. By now, I think probably the biggest influence is TikTok and Instagram. Like when I go and teach workshops around the country, one of the things that people continuously do is bring me their phone and say, can you help me make this? And it's always a TikTok or a reel, an Instagram reel. So it's very interesting because when I was in school, our whole study experience was going to the library. I went to the University of Florida, which had an art and architecture library. And my professors just encouraged us, just go sit in the library, pull out books. You don't have to be looking for something specific. Pull out books until you find something interesting. So I have the smell of old books embedded in my psyche from that. So I wanted to talk to the whole panel about how you're taking in influence and information, because one of the things as artists is that there are so many ways to work in clay, even just in clay. You can be a hand builder, you can be a thrower, a slip caster. So can you talk a little bit about what's going on in your studios today, like the things that you're excited about making and how you decide what to make?
I recently finished a large project for somebody, so that there's that side of what I'm doing, and that's always nice to do, especially what I do now. I think listening to some of your conversations or hearing other people say the same thing. I want to do the work that I want to do. I'm not going to do exactly what somebody maybe has in their head, but I can say I can do my version of that and then do a large kind of run on something. But other than that, I'm really, at this point, I'm not really doing anything other than what I want to do. That's where I am now. And so I teach a couple classes here. I teach some classes out of my studio, and that's, and what I sell is enough.
Being a multimedia artist, what I love about clay and what is consistent now in my clay making is clay is so versatile that you can use it for conceptual work. And that's what I love, because what you can show in a three-dimensional piece would be very hard to translate on a canvas. And so I've done large installations, very large, using ceramics. And of course now, lately, because there's just no room, as we all know, I do smaller works. But the conceptual part is what draws me to use ceramics. I find that it's just a brilliant medium for that.
Yeah, what are you working on now?
I haven't actually worked in ceramics for quite a few months because I'm writing my second novel and also into printing. So I'm a bit all over the place.
Because you mentioned the novel, I wanted to talk a little bit about the first novel. Did you know this? This is a famous author that we have here with us today, a much awarded author. And before we started the recording, we talked about how a book project is a very long-term thinking. In fact, I think you said 10 years on the first novel. Clay is not that. Like, clay is immediate. Like, you press the clay, it registers the mark. It's a very, I don't want to say instant gratification, but it is a very immediate experience. So can you compare the creative timeline of an author? And I know you write articles as well. So either an article or a book-length project, how does your creativity come out differently with something long-term than it does with something short-term?
That's such a great question. And clay is, like you said, immediate, even though when you're waiting for the kiln to take it out of the kiln, it can seem like a long time, right? Everyone's like... but let's say taking the book, my first book, L'Origine, took 10 years, but that's because I also researched a lot. But what we were talking about before on this topic is so interesting because it made me think about how the main body of work that you put into a book is the editing and the revision, and revision. Once a piece of ceramics is fired, you just can't go back and revise it. And that, I think, is like the ultimate difference, because at some point you have to stop writing and say, okay, I'm done. But with ceramics, it's very black and white. Once you get it in front of you, it's a solid three-dimensional piece, and that's it, you know.
Well, Sarah, I want to draw you back into the conversation. As a curator, you can endlessly move objects around a room. So how do you stop yourself and trust, like, no, this is the show. I've put the show together. Then you write your statement and you're done.
Over time, I have gotten much faster at the layout. I think early in my career, I had more anxiety about whether or not I was doing it right, whether or not the artist would appreciate it. As an artist myself, I had a solo show once where I was instructed to deliver the art and walk away. And then when I came back in, I looked around and I felt like my heart break a little bit. I felt that the curator didn't get it because of the placement of the show. So I carry that with me, and I want to make sure the artists know that I get it. But how can you possibly ensure such a thing when so much of the appreciation of art is subjective? Once you put your work into the world, people will see in it whatever they will see, and there is no control. So I've given myself permission to see what I see, and also understand that I have now 25 plus years of experience doing this, and that I feel there's a confidence that also grows thanks to the artists that I've worked with who have given positive feedback and just said, I've never seen my work this way before. You saw things and relationships between pieces that I've never seen, and thank you for that. And I've heard that quite a few times from artists, and that has given me more confidence to keep going, and also an understanding that there is a relationship between curator and artist that I perhaps didn't appreciate in that show, where my heart broke when I saw the layout, and like, well, maybe there was something that the curator was seeing that I didn't see in my own work. A few years ago, I fell in love with making mosaic. And not so long ago, I would just say a few months ago, I was in this room hanging art, and I went, oh my gosh, of course I fell in love with mosaic. It's the same thing. It is finding the pieces and putting them together to make a whole. And it's also working. I haven't hand-built any of my tessera before, although that is probably what's next for me. But I've been using foraged objects. A big, care for the environment is present in a lot of what I do as a person, but also as an artist. So one of my rules is I don't buy the materials. They have to be things that would have otherwise been chucked. And so I have friends who make stained glass and save me their scraps. I have friends who work in clay. I get things from thrift stores and off my local Buy Nothing group, and I save things, and then I smash them and put them back together. And it very much speaks to either an aesthetic thing or a neurotic thing or something, but I really do. I had this aha moment that, what I'm doing when I'm making mosaic is also curation, and vice versa. Yeah.
Before we open it up to the audience for questions, I wanted to ask you all just a little bit about being an artist in Northern Virginia. We're a little bit outside of DC here, but you're close to a very cosmopolitan area that has ambassadors from countries around the world, and also artists from around the world and people from around the world. Like, this whole part of Northern Virginia is more diverse than many other parts of Virginia where I grew up. So can you talk a little bit about finding community here? Like, how, as an artist, you've found the community to buy your work, to make a living, but also to do this, to be a part of this community that is the Workhouse Arts Center?
You know, I've been in the area for about a couple of years now. I moved here summer 2023, and the main reason was I just finished school. I was going to stay with my sister who's already here in Virginia with her family while I look for another job. I'm grateful that I got to actually start off right after school within the arts because, you know, that starving artist kind of phrase is still real. And I feel like, well, that's, you know, how we connect. You got to find other starving artists. And, but yeah, as someone, you know, still in the mid-20s, it's really great. It's great to be in the Northern. Like you said, it's very diverse. People from different cultures, different lands, speak different languages. You know, they make these beautiful works that it's almost like I don't need to travel that much around the world. Like, if I want to go to Spain, I have a friend who's Spanish and he makes art, so I'll learn from his works of art. So, and yeah, it's really cool. It's very diverse, and it's also a good area. You know, a lot of, especially as a ceramicist too. Like, there's people. What I love about my work is that the students in the community that we build through clay. I've met lawyers, I've met business owners, people that own restaurants. You know, very fancy people and people that, you know, from all different backgrounds that work with the agency, things like that. So clay has given me that opportunity, and art in general, to, like, I have something, a skill set I can share or teach them, and then they have their, like, life to share with me as well, and it's really good. So yeah.
I found my clay community at Alexandria Clay Co-op. It's an incredible place. But I don't want to sound negative, but I come from, I live in Fairfax, Virginia, and I have been disappointed after living in different parts of the world. I feel that there isn't that much support of the arts. There's not that many opportunities. So I do have to look far and wide. That's been my experience.
I moved here right after college, not thinking about the arts. I had a degree in philosophy, so naturally I went to work for a bank. And I did that for a while. I learned a little, you know, and soon after that started taking art classes, pottery classes, studying at the Corcoran. So that's where I met Margaret. I think the community had shifted over time. So depending on where I was, I think I was closer to DC, so there was community there. And I've moved further out and then back further in, and been teaching all over. So I found I think people who are interested all over, this is a great place. So I really can't emphasize enough how really great it is to be part of the Workhouse. So I think that this is where, you know, the people that I see in the out here, this is where the people are. Yeah.
I agree with both of you, although you're not necessarily agreeing with each other. I think I just looked up. So Fairfax County is home to 1.1 million people, and 31% of that population is foreign-born. And what does that have to do with the arts? Not much, but it is interesting. You were talking about the diversity here, and I think in the U.S., one of the things that we get hung up on is sort of like how art is happening in institutional space. But because we have so much such a large foreign-born population, there is quite a lot of creativity happening in non-traditional art spaces around here. Sometimes I drive through Merrifield and there's a group, someday I'm just gonna pull over and talk to them because I'm super curious, but there's a group from a moving vehicle while I'm trying to keep my family safe, I think they are maybe from an Andean culture, either Bolivian or Peruvian dance group that dances in a parking lot in Merrifield. If you're listening, call me. I really they're finding space to do their traditional arts in a way that works for them, whether, who knows how, if they're in a guerrilla style or just pop-up dance, or they're renting the space. And I think art happening in unexpected places is something that a lot of communities have come to appreciate as the norm because of funding issues, because of being under-resourced, because artists are scrappy and some of us are starving, and we'll make it happen. We'll find that parking garage, we'll find those walls, and make it happen. Fairfax County certainly has more support than other places in the Workhouse Arts Center is a great example of this. The county owns the land that the foundation operates this organization on. And so there is a really beautiful public-private partnership going on to make all of this happen. This is a 55-acre campus, and art is happening in every corner of it. We have art being made here, being shown here, performing arts with music and theater happening, music schools and a gymnastics school renting space here as well. So we're incubating art that's not being necessarily run by the organization. And there are not similar places. This is a very unique center. It's a definite gem in not only Fairfax County, but for the entire DMV, if I do say so myself.
Well, I wanted to open it up to the audience to see if you had any questions for Sarah or for the artists or for anyone. Do you mind turning that mic on, Ian?
This question is for Lilian. You touched upon the femininity in your work, and also the difference between American vision of femininity and the perfection. And I'm just curious how you view femininity that might influence your work from your cultural background, and how it might differ to how we view femininity here in America.
Very interesting question. I also want to preface that by saying that the female form is front and center of most of my work. I'm very drawn to that. But as far as the differences that I notice, I was born in France, and I spent quite a bit of time in France and the Middle East. And what I've discovered and what I admire in women in those different places compared to America is they seem to accept where they are more. This is a gross generalization, but you just feel that amongst women, they excel at making the most of what they have. It's not like this herd mentality of going to this perfection where we use all manner of plastic surgery and things like that. It's just a more individualized femininity, and to me that is much more beautiful and sexier as well.
Nobody has pressing questions about jar?
Well, I actually want to do a quick, very informal survey. So when I'm looking out into the audience, I wanted to think about how you as the audience in Northern Virginia define yourselves. So if you consider yourself an artist, can you raise your hand? Okay. And if you consider yourself a buyer of art, can you raise your hand? Okay. And there's a good bit of overlap between the two. But one of the things I'm interested in is how individual towns see themselves as artistic or not. So part of this podcast is I've traveled around the U.S., traveled around many English-speaking countries. In certain towns, we'll say we are a creative town, and the mayor is proud of it, and the town board is proud of it, as to where other towns that might have the same amount of artists don't accept that as their identity. So I know you probably all live all over the Northern Virginia area, but I'm very interested in what you all think about how this place, Lorton, Virginia, defines itself. So, and you probably all don't live in this town either, but I just wanted to, for the people that are listening to this in Australia and in Spain and in other countries, how would you pitch this area to people that aren't from here? Do you think about this as a creative hub or not as a creative hub? Maybe it has some work to do by the look in Lilianne's face.
I honestly, I feel like there's so much going on. I really was, right before this, I was at another art event in Reston and then came here, yeah, there's more than I can do. So I think, and I pretty much keep to myself. So I think if you can't find the art in the area, you're doing something wrong.
I think there's a lot, like you say, there's a lot going on here in traditional and non-traditional arts. But after having lived here for over 20 years, I would not describe Northern Virginia's identity as art-centric or artsy.
It's not like St. Pete or Asheville, for sure. So, and that I totally, see that.
I think part of our challenge here is spread. This is a very sprawling suburban area. There are no town centers, no town squares. We have to create them within our institutions rather than being able to just go to them. There are some more push for multi-use building, but when this area was developed in the 60s and 70s, what people wanted was a big yard and nothing nearby, no riffraff, no noise. And so what we've created for ourselves they created for us, thank you for nothing. I mean, it's paradise for some people. You can sit on your front porch and you don't have loud crowds of people walking by, but what you also have is a very car-dependent culture. And there is a downside to that. And it does impact the arts in a big way because there has not been a push until now really for public art. And I think that that's what creates an art community is when you see it everywhere you go. And unfortunately, with the way this area was developed, that's not the case. I'm seeing more and more strip malls have like murals pop up on the side of the grocery store, but it's not a lot. I trust and I know I have the inside scoop it's going to increase in the coming years. That's something that our local arts council, Arts Fairfax, which is a nonprofit organization and Fairfax County's designated arts council, has prioritized based on feedback they're getting from the community. People want to see art as part of the fabric of everyday life here, and they're not. Venues are a big challenge for us too. We've been talking only about visual art, but Northern Virginia has some excellent theater and music. But again, you're going to drive half an hour plus to get there. The Workhouse, we've been an art center for 17 years, and what we hear the most is, oh yeah, I've never been there. It feels like it's really far away. Well, where do you live? Well, I live, and it's maybe half an hour. Well, where do you go for art? And they're going into Washington, D.C., which has the Smithsonian, which nobody can compete with that. But there's no parking, and it's chaos. And, like here we have... Okay, you drive the same amount, and then there's like big free parking spots, and there, for me, there's more incentive to come to something like this, but not everybody sees it that way. People who want the world-class experience can absolutely go into Washington and get into all of those museums for free. You can walk into a museum, look at 2 paintings, and then go into the next museum, and that's a real benefit to being in this area. Is I think that national. Our national museums are just a stone's throw away. So then the resources and the attention towards the smaller things on the outskirts maybe get diminished by that. So there's an interesting tension there.
Yeah, and for me, I feel like I have no say in this, but also I can say a little bit because I still consider myself a student of the arts, still fresh out of school, and then I just entered continue working in the arts. So I haven't really traveled anywhere else to compare this place to, except for where I went to school. It was a small town. There wasn't really big support in the arts there. And then here, again, I haven't been around a lot. So it is, to me, it's growing, and it's the biggest art place that I've experienced for myself until I go somewhere else and see it. So.
Well, I got the opportunity to teach a workshop of ceramic artists this weekend over in the Clay building, and I encourage you to come over and see what we've been making. But I was talking to one of the participants today about Northern Virginia, and he said, around here we're very well educated, and we read a lot, and we follow directions. And I thought that was the most interesting description of a place that I had ever heard. Because naturally, artists, we like to push the boundaries. We like to say, well, clay can be stretched this far, so let me stretch it a little bit farther and see what happens. And I feel like that's the role of the Workhouse Arts Center, is to take the boundaries of the culture and to push them and to see what happens. I wanted to thank you all in the audience for coming, and also the artists for being a part of the show. I just wanted to see if we could give a quick round of applause for them.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I'd like to thank Lilianne, Kessler, and Jason for coming on the show, as well as Sarah for curating the exhibition and for helping to put my whole experience at the Workhouse Arts Center together. If you're in Northern Virginia, I hope you'll check out the Arts Center, which has rotating exhibitions as well as workshops and events and all sorts of other things. Before we go, I'd like to thank today's sponsors. That's Monkey Stuff, the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art, and Cornell Studio Supply. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor on the podcast, you can get in touch at talesoftheredclayrambler.com. I'll be back in a couple weeks with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.